So I think let's go ahead and start with intros. First, I'm Kathleen McCulley. I think everybody knows me at this point. I'm a Grizzly Corps Fellow for the RCD, kind of helping take charge on do this strategic plan update among some other things. And I'll be facilitating today. Otherwise, first up on my participant list is Alan Sigmiller.
Hi, Alan Sigmiller with Trinity Trail Alliance.
All right, then I have Kelly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Sheen. I'm the district manager for the Trinity County Resource Conservation District.
All right, then I have Jill Cox.
Good afternoon, Jill Cox, Trinity County Board of Supervisors.
Laura Broadhead.
Hi, Laura Broadhead. I'm brand new in my position, but I'm the Assistant Field Manager for Recreation Resources, or Recreation Realty and GIS in the Reading BLM. Been around for a while, but a new role.
Awesome, good to have you. Let's see, then I have Cindy Childress.
Hello, I'm Cindy from the Norelmic-Wintu tribe, and I'm happy to be here as well.
Awesome. Then I have Pat.
Pat Frost, just kind of member of the steering committee. Been doing the same thing for a while.
All right, then Keith.
Keith Green with Sierra Pacific Weaverville, and I want to encourage Pat to keep both hands on the wheel.
All right, then Azalee.
Hey, I'm Azalee. I'm the Forest Health Program Manager at the Trinity County RCD.
And Oz is my supervisor and my partner in crime on this, so I'm sure she'll definitely be chiming in, and I might ask her, you know, to back me up on things or provide other info. Next, I have Jennifer.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Mata. I'm the field manager for the Reading BLM.
All right, then Amelia.
Good afternoon, Amelia Flights. I'm the Watershed Program Manager for the Trinity County Resource Conservation District.
And James Avon. We're just doing intros, but if you don't feel comfortable, that is okay too.
Oh, here we go. I got myself unmuted. I'm still learning things. So anyway,
No problem.
I am just a citizen hanging out, seeing what's going on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, James. Then I have Kimberly Stahl.
Hi, Kim Stahl, archaeologist with the Forest Service out of Weaverville.
Awesome. Let's see who's next. Denise.
Hi, I'm Denise Wesley. I'm the GIS manager for the Trinity County Resource Conservation District.
All right, and then Ricky.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rick Satomi, Cooperative Extension Forest Advisor.
Okay, and I think that is everyone on my list for introductions, but I missed you. If I missed you, please feel free to speak up. I think we have a lot of attendance today, which is awesome.
Looks like everybody.
Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and jump right in then. Again, thanks everybody for being here on your Friday lunch break time-ish time. First of all, does anybody have anything they would like to add or change to the agenda? Hearing and seeing crickets. So kind of overarching progress update. The only thing I think that isn't super recreation section specific if you were able to review the draft that I sent out or the Google Doc, I think you'll see that Ozalie and I made some progress on addressing our kind of numbering issue from last meeting. And within the appendix, as far as numbering the guidelines and just trying to organize better. So could we get maybe a temperature check on how people felt about that? We'll get more into the appendix, discussing content later, but I thought I'd just go ahead and ask that up front.
I think it's a vast improvement.
Thank you. All right, so getting some thumbs up. Awesome. Hopefully that is a done deal and we can just move forward and apply it to the other sections. Okay, we got quite a few comments from various individuals this month. So I kind of wanted to start out just talking about some of the terminology we were using in this section and things that people flagged. Namely, various people had things to say about using cultural use kind of to go along with recreation. And so I think Ozalie and I were seeing this as any and all, activities that might fall within the context of cultural practice for the community at large. So that could be Neural-McWintu basket weaving, that could be people hunting, for sport or food, collecting Christmas trees during the winter holidays. But I know that there are specific uses that, for example, the federal agencies have tied to, say, cultural resources. I'm not sure if that also applies to cultural use, but yeah, we kind of just wanted to bring that up for discussion with everyone. Someone suggested potentially using community use instead. Just wanted to see what.
Can I chime in there?
Yeah, go for it.
I would like to see it remain cultural because that covers a broad amount of things that the tribe uses the forest for. And it doesn't limit it as much of when we do want to gather our plants or do basket weaving or whatever we are doing. I just think that that's a better use of the word rather than community.
Okay.
Would accessible community and cultural use work?
That would be good.
And just take out recreation there, Ricky?
Yeah, I think recreation falls under community use. At least that's the way I interpret it. And I'd be interested if others feel the same way.
I agree. Yes.
Seems reasonable.
Okay, yeah, I could see that. Any objections to just changing the title of the objective to community and cultural use?
Just a question, and that would be, I always look at the strategic plan as kind of a document that then also is used to secure funding. And we're just going to have to make sure, community use is not a term that I hear when people are putting out requests for proposals for handing out money. So I think we just need to be really careful to make sure that recreation continues to show up, because that's where money's going to come from.
Yeah, I think when we're talking specifically about trails and camping and that kind of thing, like we can, especially now, make sure we're kind of emphasizing that recreation is part of community use for that reason.
Can you slash it, Kathleen? Can you go community/recreation and cultural?
That's doable. We're getting a little long, but.
Kathleen, I suppose my concern with the use of cultural use to be a broad term is that it does not align with the way it's used in other contexts, both from federal and state agencies. You know, recreation is fine as a catch-all. You know, I consider fishing recreation. I consider going for a hike recreation. I'm comfortable with that, but I think we just have to be clear that cultural use in this context refers specifically to native and indigenous uses to align better with the more formally accepted definition.
This is Keith. I wonder if this might be one of those lead-in opportunities where we redefine terms because I didn't see the very good connection between cultural use and recreation under one heading. I was struggling with that because when I think of cultural use, I also think of it as historical cultural practices as opposed to, or in contrast to today's practices. And yet, maybe this is the time where we change the word cultural to address current culture and recent history as well as ancient history, and then make sure that we define what those uses are, including, for me, I was struggling with what are these arrays of forest products collection. So at some point, we're going to have to define those so people understand it. So I think if you define the terms and use the right words, even the ones that are more commonly accepted, like, you know, historic cultural practices, as well as recreation. We know what recreation is, we think.
Yeah, I think in a lot of the conversations that Kathleen and I were having, we had kind of, so it's like traditional recreation, like trails and campgrounds, and then cultural uses by Nuralmukwintu that we've discussed with Cindy, like collections for basket weaving or medicinal uses. And then also these like what we were thinking of as like a form of cultural use, like Kathleen was saying, but by non-native cultures. So like collecting firewood being probably like a prime example of like that's sort of a cultural activity of people who live in this area, but it's not under that, the way like Ricky is saying, like it's not under, doesn't fall under how federal agencies might use that term. So I do think that I do think that community and cultural uses would sum up everything, and recreation would be under there. So I'm kind of in favor of using that. And like you were saying, Pat, I think it is really important to use the word recreation in a visible way, because that is how a lot of pots of funding are tagged as. So I think there's a way that we could call it community and cultural use, and then and still highlight recreation throughout. That would make sense to me.
All right. Any other thoughts or objections? I think it kind of sounds to me like community and cultural use is the way to go.
What about community recreation and cultural use? Would that be too much?
I think that puts the emphasis in the wrong place because the cultural uses are not just recreational. We talked about non-economic uses like Christmas trees and firewood gathering, and all those are things that are non-productive but are common practices for the community. So community use that is non-recreational, I think, should be attached to those cultural uses.
Okay, sounds good.
I do agree with that as well.
Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads and statements of approval, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and make that change. And we will tie that throughout where necessary. Okay. Next,
I I would think that the word accessible would still be like the.
Oh, yes. Perfect. Okay, next I actually got a few conflicting comments about whether to address the Weaverville Fire Protection District or Fire Department as one or the other. So I don't know if anyone knows if officially they go by one or the other. I think it's Fire Protection District.
The Fire Protection District is the official name of it.
Okay.
And that sort of connotates a very specific and hard line, you know, that they operate within, even though they actually respond outside of that area.
Alrighty, good to know. And then I think while not on this current page, it occurs in lots of places throughout the appendix. But Osley and I weren't sure kind of what to call what we might be calling like rules of the community forest, or terms of use for the community forest. Laura suggested WCF restrictions and regulations. But I just wanted to bring that up in case anyone else had other thoughts. We didn't quite standardize a term for that yet.
Restrictions and regulations, I mean, is that what we're mostly talking about then? I mean, you know, obviously there's rules of the trails and then other things where that might, you know, be a little bit softer. But, I mean, if we're mostly referring to sort of restrictions, you know, or regulations that are to be adhered to, then, you know, those are probably the appropriate terms.
Yeah, I think the way we've kind of been talking about these types of things is anything from, right, like allowed trail use, whether or not, you know, OHVs are allowed in this area, firearms, etc. Just generally kind of what's allowed on the community forest in maybe different places. And I think this kind of comes up like on posting signage about those things.
The term is definitely regulation. Well, I say definitely, again, first week on the job. I'm pretty sure it's regulation on the federal, at least BLM side. Pretty sure it's the same for the Forest Service. Like things that say like no campfires here or day use only, those are regulations.
Specifically regulations. Okay, good to know.
So this is Keith. I'm going to ask you a question pertaining to the land managers, BLM and Forest Service, because you're not the same. Can we impose as a strategic group or as the RCD, can we impose additional restrictions that go, maybe if they go above and beyond, that might be helpful, but don't they have to adopt their own as far as what restrictions are allowed and not allowed on their property?
So, I mean, that would be, I assume it would be something we would discuss with this group and, you know, take feedback and priorities and stuff. But I think an example, and Jennifer might know more about this than me, but for example, we closed the community forest to camping in the past several years, I believe. Is that true?
Yeah.
So that was probably something that this group and our law enforcement and stuff like that wanted to see happen. And so we went through a federal process to officially do that. So I think the answer to your question, Keith, is maybe like both things. Like we would listen, but it doesn't become official where we could, like, for example, ticket people or anything like that until we go through the federal process to establish it as a regulation.
Okay, that makes sense, because that's what I was thinking was we have no enforcement capabilities. Osley's not going to go arrest anybody. Although she's probably strong enough, I just can't picture that happening. for one of our preferences. You know, we have, you know, we want somebody's out on a motorcycle on a bike trail. We can probably bring somebody in, but we really don't have an enforcement capabilities.
Yeah, as stewards, the RCD has no, you know, we're not a regulatory agency, so we have no ability, nor, you know, do we have law enforcement or any of that kind of like authority at all whatsoever. So that's, you know, we would be reliant on the enforcement of those, you know, regulations, you know, based on the specific land managers, you know, capability and capacity to enforce those.
Yeah, and I think, I was just going to add quick to clarify, as far as I'm aware, nothing so far that we've put in the recreation or now the community and cultural use section is new regulations. It's just would be sharing like on WCF signage what the existing federal regulations are for, you know, proper trail use or et cetera, et cetera.
So this is Jennifer. What I was just going to clarify with what Laura said. So we either have existing regulations that are in like the CFRs that are standard, like we have a set of standard regulations for campgrounds and trailheads and things like that. And then when we have site-specific regulations, at least on the BLM side, they're known as supplemental rules, which have to be like decisions made and then have to actually be put in the Federal Register notice for a supplemental rule to be added to for a restriction to be added to any particular place. I will clarify that we do not, in fact, have a federal supplemental rule for the no camping ordinance that's in the community forest. That is only a county ordinance or a community ordinance. So it's not citable under the federal side of the house. So it's only citable on the local side because we did not think at the time we could get through our process a federal supplemental rule to actually make camping off limits. So we'll need to clean that up. So it is a federal supplemental rule in our current resource management plan.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that clarification,
And
Jennifer. It's good to know.
Just to clarify too, for my purposes, we can make those decisions in the RMP though. Okay.
Okay, got it.
So we are currently in the process of updating our RMP, as probably most of you know. So if there is anything we need to clean up or any new supplemental rules we would like to see in the community forest, the time is ripe for the BLM.
Yeah, definitely. That is good to know. Okay. Let's see. And
there was Kathleen, real quick, there was a request to highlight the section that being reviewed. We were just talking about terminology, correct? This isn't specific to a, there's going to be numerous, like a number of references to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the moment, I just wanted to first and foremost bring up some terminology issues that came up in different places in the document or several people commented on. So I'm not discussing a specific sentence or anything yet. And I think last terminology issue is just going to be clarifying or changing what we're calling forest products. So again, Osley and I were taking this kind of on the theme of federal forest product collection permits, which include a number of things, not just lumber or timber. That also includes mushrooms and other various things people might collect out of the forest and need a permit for on federal land. But I think there was a little bit confusion because forest products are also often more associated with timber and lumber. So we are thinking maybe just changing that to like forest materials that, are collectible, that people are collecting. But again, wanted to pose that to the group.
Our permits call them special forest products. I don't know if that solves your issue, adding the word special. But yeah, special forest products, SFPs. But in any term you use is fine to make it clear.
Alrighty.
Does the Forest Service have a different term, or do they also use special, non-commercial? Any of those?
Probably knew the answer a couple years ago, but I don't know anymore.
I know it's not the same as BLM, but I don't know what it is. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, something like that. Special sounds great to me.
Yeah, special or Ricky, you also mentioned non-commercial, I think would work too, but I guess can we get maybe a consensus temperature check on how people feel about continuing to use forest product with some modification or maybe forest material?
I think forest
I
material.
don't think we want. I'm sorry, Laura, what?
Oh, I guess I don't really have an opinion. Either way is fine for me. So
I would recommend not using non-commercial just because I think that's somewhat limiting.
Yeah, because people can still sell the things that they collect. That's true.
Yep.
Okay, well, we'll maybe try to check in with Forest Service offline about if they have a different term, but otherwise maybe just use special forest product.
I'm okay with that.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, so I think can move out of terminology now and kind of get into the meat. So you'll see that some things we have kind of changed to blue text. That's where Osley and I may have made an update according to kind of the consensus of comments that we received. So those things are small content or text changes that we made that we wanted to make visible as we were comparing side by side. But first, I kind of wanted to bring up this issue about community forest or trail system roads. So it seems like there's not exactly consistent information about what are considered roads on the trail system, and even maybe necessarily where OHV designated roads are. I've seen a couple of maps, including federal maps, that conflict with trail maps or that kind of thing. So I think we just need to have a little bit of a conversation about how to identify those roads, and also what we really want to list here. Do we just want to talk about federally maintained roads, or also like county roads like Oregon Street or Little Browns Creek Road that provide public access?
I wish we had Mike McFadden on here, because clearly, the thing that I would originally, roads like Weaver Valley Road or Musser Hill Road or the Homestead Loop, which were technically considered part of their transportation system, and were not deemed trails per se. They originally were considered all use, but then my understanding was that at a certain point they decided that there were certain types of roads that would not be considered OHV roads. And the last that I was aware of, there is not one single road or trail within the community forest that's considered OHV acceptable, even though they all, they oftentimes get used that way. They're, my understanding is that they're not technically considered OHV routes.
And this is Pat, and I think that what you have to do, Kathleen Osley, is probably check with Mike and check with the Forest Transportation Management Plan, which gives every road its designation, what it can be used for. And I have the same recollection Kelly does.
The Forest Transportation Management Plan, you called it, Pat?
Yeah.
They oftentimes refer to it as the MVUM.
Oh yeah, I have looked at that map and it does. I actually have it pulled up. I could share really quickly. So this does. Come on. I'll try to be quick about this if it loads. These kind of dotted roads are supposed to be OHV allowed roads.
Okay, so where you can see there on Weaverville Road, that's getting pretty far up into the,
Yeah.
and is mostly above the community forest.
Yeah, so I believe this stretch is community forest. This is Glennison Gap Road over here, so that apparently may be an OHV road. What has really confused me, and Zach Blanchard actually pointed this out to me, is that this loop here is OHV allowed, which is the Musser Homestead Loop, which I was under the impression was just a all-use hiking, biking, etc. trail. So yeah, I think there's some clarification, especially on the Forest Service side, to be had there. I heard from the new recreation park ranger at BLM, David Byers, that he told me that any vehicle allowed road on the BLM side is OHV allowed, which I believe would mean Democrat Gulch, Upper Democrat Gulch, or Upper Democrat Gulch Road, etc. So I think potentially we just have some more investigative work to do there.
Yeah, so this is kind of, I kind of got down a rabbit hole maybe in my comment talking about travel management. So the forest has done it, again, to my knowledge, the BLM hasn't really done comprehensive travel management. So we don't have those same sort of like designations that the Forest Service does. So what it generally says in our old RMP is that like existing routes can be used by motorized vehicles. What that actually means is more open to interpretation than we like to think about. But in practice, I think it's mostly like existing roads, OHVs are allowed if it's within, county regulations or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I do wish we had Mike on the phone, but we can follow up with him.
So in the context of this meeting, I guess I'm just a little unclear about what the issue is. I mean, there's definitely some confusion about which roads are allowable for which use, but is the community forest trying to change the designation of certain roads on BLM and Forest Service land?
No,
we want a clean map that we can put out.
Yeah, I think we just want to have it identified, written down, have it on maps, have it in the places where it's relevant. So that even the larger community does know, for example, where they're allowed to ride their OHV. That doesn't mean everyone is going to follow those rules, unfortunately, but I think, all of the responsible agencies involved in being good managers and stewards need to have clear resources about what's legal and what's not.
Okay, I would kind of second what Ricky was saying. It was a little, to me, the OHV stuff in here was just like a little muddled about like, what's the point? The point is that that's the issue that we've identified, that it is unclear to the public what is currently allowable. It's not that we're trying to change anything or that, we're going to prioritize doing travel management. We're going to communicate what is currently allowed. So if you could I don't know of a specific spot in the document to do that, but I think making that connection very clear. Here's the issue, here's what we're gonna do in the next, time period in the community forest.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Oz.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here because this is obviously that we're starting the conversation about this from the current conditions section. So I think the question there is, okay, what is useful in the current conditions section in terms of roads? Like we could just say like, there are roads, like that could be as broad as we go. There's roads to get people into the community forest. Do we want to try to go down this, track down this information? Like we're saying, it's not as easy as we may have hoped at first, and figure out, list out, okay, these are the current conditions are this. We have this road, and this road that have these uses and have a map that details that, or, so I think that's one part of it, Laura, of like, what's the point in this section? The point is just to get out what the current conditions are, and it's up to us how detailed we want to go and how useful, like what's useful to us as a current condition summary. And it, like I said, could be broad, or we could try to get detailed so that we have it pinned down as the current condition. And then I think later on, what you're saying comes more into play when we get into the actual guidelines in the appendix. So like, that's where we could say like the priority is just to clearly communicate to the public what is already allowed. And we do have some things in there about, maybe changing the designation of some areas. So that's where I think we get more into that bit, but I think they're kind of two different things. So, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of like, first we have to decide what we want to say about roads in the current condition. And then when we get into the guidelines, we have to decide what our point is there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we want to keep pushing forward, and I will kind of modify and say, I will kind of modify and say that I think in the plan, we obviously do have as a desired outcome, like designate an OHV area so that we limit illegal use, but that's a conversation to be had in a little bit. So I see Pat said in the chat, the second to the last line in the second paragraph in current conditions, naturalizing is not the right word. Can you enlighten me to what the right word is, Pat?
I'm not sure what you even mean there. I mean, naturalizing is making more natural.
Like well, being a naturalist, like nature viewing, maybe.
Enjoying nature.
Yeah, like bird watching or
just maybe
identifying plants.
Nature viewing is what I would.
Well, and once again, this is an area where we're conflating cultural and community use, so that there should be some work there to clean that up.
Yeah, well, and I mean, obviously I'll need to add in community use throughout the section now. Okay, but pushing on, do people feel okay about how we have slightly modified the text of our purpose statements? You can compare in blue to what we had previously. And I can read aloud if that is helpful.
I notice it says materials, and I think just as after the fact, once we've gone through this, if we're going to use special products or whatever we use, we should probably just change that everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, there will definitely be a little standardizing to do after the call. But I got some thumbs up, some head shakes. Any objections? All right. Okay, moving on to desired outcomes and some of the comments we got there. Just kind of wanted to confirm and pose with the group that these are sort of active statements. They're desired outcomes, what we do want to see in 8 years' time or possibly longer. So we didn't want them to be, like consider XYZ. It was like, this is an active statement and we're gonna do this on the forest in 8 years. But are there any objections to that type of tense?
and again, I feel like we've said this a lot, and it typically always comes up in the comments, and I feel like it bears restating, is just that, which I think we're going to talk about more later in the meeting, but just that these are recommendations from the steering committee. So desired is the key word. They're not like demanded outcomes or anything like that. So I just want to restate that these are desired outcomes from the steering committee. So it's up to this group to decide if these are our desires or not. And that's what they are. Nothing more, nothing less.
Definitely.
Is there a reason why the second and third one are separated? They seem quite similar to me.
Yeah, so we had a couple of comments. You can see here on my right window how they used to be combined, and we just got a couple of comments about how it was confusing, that we were saying prioritize, prioritize over what, or just putting it all into one sentence in general was maybe a little too much information. So we thought we're not necessarily trying, because like Oz said, they're desired outcomes from the steering committee. We're not necessarily prioritizing one over the other. Both are things that we want to see. So we just split it into basically the first being continue and increase maintenance, and the second being limit new trails to accessibility, connectivity, and decom road conversion.
But the second bullet is like pretty redundant with the third, I think.
This second and this third.
Is that what you were saying, Ricky?
Oh, sorry, the two blue ones. I mean,
okay.
I'm not familiar enough with ADA, but are new trails not required to comply with ADA?
Well, I mean, we can't have every trail ADA compliant, right?
Sure.
It depends on the purpose of the trail as to whether or not it needs to be ADA compliant. I have a question about the 1, 2, 3, 4. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sixth bullet about responsible agencies will designate a legal OHV use area within the community forest. I'm not, can somebody fill me in on that request?
Yeah, so I think hopefully people are mostly aware that OHV use is contentious in the area, and is very alive, even though we actually don't have a legal OHV park or anything like that. And as we kind of discussed a little bit, little to no OHV road access. And what we have heard often in having conversations with you all this past month, Forest Service, BLM, TTA, other members of the public, people in the RCD, is it seems that one of the best solutions to limiting illegal OHV use would just be to provide a legal OHV place for people to go that could be, constructed and maintained in such a way that it would be appropriate for OHV use, and so that we're discouraging just off-roading randomly off trail.
I'm just gonna find out where Weaverville is real quick.
So that's kind of the background information on that, Jennifer.
Hey, Kathleen, I can jump in real quick. I have not yet heard the Community Forest Steering Committee take a stance on this as a whole. I would change that maybe to phrase will evaluate designating it, because I think there are also options to have it outside of the community forest, that it doesn't need to be designated inside the community forest, that there's other opportunities. So I haven't seen a clear step from the Community Forest Steering Committee saying that they want to see that off-highway vehicle area in the community forest yet.
Well, I think that I know that I've specifically had discussions with folks at the Forest Service, and I think some of this is addressed in the guidelines in the latter part, in the appendices of this, the current, draft appendices that we have of the document now, that talk specifically about the designation of what they lovingly refer to as the Spaghetti Bowl off of Weaverville Road, which is already being heavily utilized as by OHV users as being that place that would, and it happens to fall within the community forest.
Yeah, I think that is why we phrased it as within the community forest, but I think you're right, Amelia, that if there were somewhere else locally suited, around the Weaverville area, it doesn't have to be within the community forest. It just seems like a good opportunity to use what we already have. But I think that's a decent point. If this is not something that the steering committee wants to see, we could just say, to advocate for creating an OHV area in the Weaverville area to limit use within the community forest or something like that.
So I would suggest changing it to will evaluate the potential for a legal off-highway use area within the community forest. Or if it's really a Forest Service issue, then maybe it should say the Forest Service if they plan on designating one. But just a little bit into how that process works. Like currently the way our land use plan reads for the BLM, I cannot do this because I would need to have a land use plan that designates the community forest as, like open to OHV or at least open to trails. And we'd have to make that designation, and then post plan, I would have to then in travel management as to actually designate open routes and focus that. So will is a pretty strong statement at this point.
I agree with evaluate.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll throw into, like Oz brought up earlier, these are our desired outcomes, suggested from the steering committee. Again, we know that the community forest kind of as a conglomerate is, and definitely the RCD is not regulatory. So these aren't demands, but I think, so I don't know if that will influence our.
It seems like there's enough still just like discussion, even among this group of it that potentially switching it to evaluate again is, we need some further digging into like who, what, where, when, why.
Keep digging for them gnarly vibes, bro.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. I think that does seem reasonable to think that maybe this isn't an issue that would get solved in 8 years, because we still have so much to figure out, and there's obviously going to be big barriers to whatever we do end up deciding. So I guess any objections to kind of adjusting the terms there to be evaluate, potential, etc. I won't try to craft new language right now, but.
So Kathleen, this is Pat. I think the same issue exists with the last bullet in the desired outcomes. To say will enhance or expand is maybe a little stronger than the agencies can commit to until it's evaluated.
Well, I think I would think, and other people can chime in, I would think that one is a little more broad. Enhance could be a lot of things, and again, they're not.
The will.
Well, and I think that because, like we've said, we want them to be active statements that are desired outcomes. you know, and we're thinking in an 8-year time frame, I think it would be reasonable to say that campgrounds or camping opportunities could be enhanced in some way in the next 8 years.
Not
Hey,
likely on the
Kathleen.
BLM, since we have a ordinance that says there's no overnight camping currently.
Yeah, Kathleen, I just have on both of those just concerns for the will statements, just because I think there's still a lot to get moved in the community input area on both of these topics as well, and where it will fall out.
I think that's fair. Yeah, and I did want to bring up, even with the group, what people hear or what you feel like the community vibe is on if we do want another campground on the community forest in general.
I think the community would like to have the ability to have a community campground, and the one that we have isn't being utilized as such. It's, you know, so I mean, I think there's a lot of, from what I recall, there's a desire to have, you know, the campground that we do have sort of back up and operational. And I believe that some of that is sort of addressed again in the guidelines section. So I don't know about, I think even just that would probably be a pretty big step forward in this regard, short, you know, of trying to, you know, acquire or attain the ability to have a second one. So
I certainly would like to see camping.
So I guess my next question, kind of follow up, Kelly / to the group, thinking in a long-term, you know, at least 8-year time scale, does that seem like too much time still to, if it is desired to have an additional campground, to acquire that kind of infrastructure, or should the focus really be just on what we've got?
I'll throw in just kind of an example of what might seem like a long time to do a simple thing, but we've been trying through the Trinity County Collaborative to get the NEPA done for 1 mile of trail adjacent to Highway 3. And we've been working on the NEPA since 2015, and it hasn't even, they're still working on the specialist report. So, you know, 5 years to work on specialist reports, and you still need the NEPA done for 1 mile of trail. So building a new campground someplace where there is no campground.
Yeah, bro, make Weaverville Valley again, am I right?
That could be a 10-year project.
Got it.
This is Rick. I feel like from a 1,000-foot view, we need to really ask ourselves, what are we prioritizing? I mean, we've identified a need for, you know, appropriate mapping information to get out so isn't misuse of trails. That's something important. You know, Pat explained how this is going to be a 10-year process. We can certainly start on it, but in terms of prioritization, getting a harvest on the forest so that it's not at as high of a risk to fire would seem to be of higher priority than to increase something that is already underutilized, or rather not underutilized, but, you know, not as well maintained as it could be.
I think just before we get in a deep discussion on that, Ricky, I do have some time set aside at the end to kind of talk about that in general. But as the plan exists insofar, you know, the guidelines are not prioritized. We just kind of have like things grouped together. And these are again, the recommendations of the steering committee, just what we want to see in total. And we don't want to try to pit different objectives against each other. So obviously, while forest health is like extremely important and a core, value of the community forest, we don't also just want to focus on that and not recreation or not education. But I do want to get into that more towards the end of the meeting.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. I was just backing up Pat's point of, when we restrict ourselves with that language, it may drive the focus into a corner that we don't have the capacity to meet in this 8-year time frame.
Right. And I do want to keep pushing forward and kind of make sure we have time for everything, but it sounds like from various comments that maybe we do not want to talk about an additional campground. Is that correct?
No, I'm not saying don't talk about it, just essentially don't require the responsible agencies to do that now.
Well, and again, I mean, nothing is required. And I think even
will enhance and or expand. Will is a pretty strong word.
It's just, as an agency person, like it's just hard to, like, plans are much more helpful for me doing my work if they're actually achievable. And I guess that's what I'm coming up against. Like, yeah, it would be absolutely great to have more camping opportunities in the community forest, but we just really come up against reality. So I guess that's where, like, even with desired outcomes, I think they should be based in a reality about what is possible and how prioritizations are really going to work. And I guess that's where the kind of rubber meets the road for me.
I agree with what Laura is saying, and I don't think we've had so much of this issue in some of the other objectives, because the desired outcomes have been something that's been achievable. So with saying that these will be evaluated instead of saying that they will be designated, that they will be enhanced, they will be expanded, I think you take these desired outcomes and you can use them as metrics later on. And so when we finish
What's going on with that Gangnam Style? That shit's cracked.
All right, I think I'm just gonna permanently mute this person if I can do that.
When we get to 2028, we're going to want to see what of these desired outcomes we were able to achieve. And so putting that evaluate in there gives us a little bit more wiggle room. That's my take on it.
Sorry, Amelia, I was listening. I'm just also trying to look at my options for this disruption. Anyone feel like it's inappropriate for me to remove them? Okay, I'm just gonna do that.
Wait, you didn't hear that explosion sound. Democracy, the last bastion of British.
Okay. Okay, I think I at least was intending with this camping desired outcome to, with even enhance, just like maybe that is make the Forest Service existing forest campground prettier,
Can we, if we're talking about semantics with regard to this, and I think that I agree that the will statement, when I started looking at this and realizing it's kind of in a lot of places, I'm just wondering if desired outcomes can't be simplified to something like enhance or expand WCF camping opportunities and keep it at that, and not say responsible agencies will do these things.
But that's exactly what it is. I mean, if you take out those words, it's still the same thing, just less clear, I think, because the whole plan is recommendations to the responsible agencies, and who else will do it if not the responsible agencies? That's my take on that. Not like there's someone else who's going to do it.
Well, if we're being told that they can't or are not interested in doing this, then it's sort of toothless.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So it'd be better to, in my view, to remove things that can't or we don't want to achieve than to just change the wording so that there isn't an actor, because then it's just sitting there, but no one will do it. You know what I mean? So I'd rather include it with the actor there if there's an actor that can do it, or remove it because it can't be done. And I just want to say, I think that part of this too is like thinking back to the other sections, because desired outcomes is, you guys have been working through this plan with us, and we've kind of evolved what this section is even. And if you recall, it started out as more of like a vision of success. So it was very much beyond the 8-year time frame. So for example, in forest health, one of our desired outcomes, was to just have like a fire resilient community forest. That's not going to happen in 8 years. No one expects that to happen in 8 years, but we were using that section to sort of talk about the direction and the vision of the steering committee. So it was much broader than 8 years. And I think we're still in the growing pains of figuring out, okay, so now we're calling them desired outcomes. Now they're these much more discrete things. So can these be desired outcomes for the long term? So we're helping produce our long-term vision, even though this is an 8-year plan, or do they need to be achievable within 8 years? Because if so, like, that's going to change a lot of things. So like we would need to have a much more specific desired outcome, for example, in terms of fire resilience, like maybe 1% of it becoming fire resilient by whatever our definition of that is. So I think that's also part of it to consider, is like, is there, and I'm not trying to argue for one way or the other, but I think just kind of detail some of the history of why it looks the way it looks maybe, and it's a decision to be made, like whether we think it's useful to have longer term desired outcomes, like just to document sort of the will of the steering committee, and that, or if it really should all be narrowed down to things that are achievable within 8 years, which will, yeah, I know, I don't want to get into this too much because Kathleen, I know you're going to talk later, like you've been saying about the prioritization, because there is a prioritization aspect to the plan that's just not visible in this section. But anyway, so I think that's just a question of what these desired outcomes are, that maybe we need to talk about more.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would say it's not that, I mean, I can only speak for the BLM, right? And so what I can say about these last 2 dots is it's not that the BLM would not be interested in entertaining either one of those 2 things. And it's not to say that either one of those things for the BLM would not be achievable in an 8-year time frame, because they very well could be. I think it's when you get to, because both of these things have to be, for us, analyzed, we still would have to change our guiding base document, which is something we talked about before. Like if it's not currently consistent with my resource management plan, then I technically can't do it. I think that's where we kind of get in that bind with using words like will. Like I don't mind committing to the BLM will, or responsible agencies, if the Forest Service is on board, will, evaluate the community's request for a legal off-highway vehicle area, within the community forest, because, we're bound to evaluate that, right? And I'm not, opposed to doing that. It's what that evaluation determines that I can't predict, because it's a public process. The same thing with camping. Like right now, the way the direction from the community was, at least on the BLM side, was we didn't want camping on that portion of the community forest because it was creating issues, mostly resulting in fire risk due to not having a developed campground and having kind of dispersed camping. So, that's a complete shift in where the community was for us to say on the BLM side that we'll enhance or expand camping opportunities. We could very well do that in the RMP process. Instead of analyzing it as an area not open to camping, we could look at an area open to camping with restrictions. But I think the will designate or will do is really for me, the sticking point. But I understand the reason of wanting will in there to kind of compel the agencies to actually do something. but it's a really fine line, I think, as to what your definition of will means. Because if I feel like if I put my name on this document as a signature and it says in here that we will designate a legal OHV area, then I've said to you guys, we will designate one. And I can't promise you that. I can commit to you that we'll analyze if there is a place appropriate on the BLM side to do that. But I can't commit to actually saying, yes, we can have one. I don't know, I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that's useful. Like I said, I
So maybe it just, for both of those, they should probably just, you know, get sort of back to what we had mentioned before, which is we'll evaluate and for the camping ones, we definitely don't. I mean, part of it was the kind of quote unquote like homeless camping issue. You know, people would get up onto the BLM property above, you know, the crossing it on Oregon Street and be there for months and months and months and months at a time. And so I think, you know, maybe it should say something like, we'll evaluate enhanced and or expanded WCF, you know, somehow like getting in there like restricted or legal camping, you know, opportunities, for example. So I think we could probably wordsmith both of these, but they should basically, I think Jennifer is correct in basically sort of putting across the idea that these aren't things that we're, you know, that we are able to evaluate them, but I think, you know, like trying to, you know, have people nailed down to this is probably not the best thing to do for this particular situation. Or these particular bullets anyways.
Yeah, okay. I think, again, we do want to push forward, so I think we should either table any further discussion on this to the end of the meeting, or we'll do follow-up post-call, but I have in my notes, yeah, to work on the language, at least for those two bullets. And I will continue to talk with you all about that. One last thing, I did want to confirm about desired outcomes though before moving forward. However, a couple of people mentioned the ABA, B as in boy, along with ADA requirements for federal agencies. And I had actually never heard of that. I Googled a little bit and it seemed like it had mostly to do with like formal buildings and structures. So I just wanted to ask federal agency representatives if that's something we need to add in alongside ADA mentions.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, I've never heard anything about the ABA. But
So,
I'm also not a recreation.
Pat, that was my comment, and the only reason I bring it up is that when we installed a new interpretive sign at Bowerman Barn, the Forest Service had ADA and ABA requirements for that signage.
Yes, Pat, I know the Forest Service has requirements for a BA in additional to a DA. So I had also proposed that the inclusion of a BA, especially if we're looking to identify ADA trails. I was not aware if we needed to also consider ABA for any of the parking signage, or if there's going to be like a restroom facility or anything like that accompanying a new ADA trail.
Okay, I can maybe look into that with Forest Service specifically.
Kathleen, this is Alan. I have two comments on the two new bullets.
Yeah.
So on the first blue bullet, is it worth, I guess, clarifying whose applicable trail standards the responsible agencies need to meet? So like their applicable trail standards as opposed to somebody else's?
Yeah, so We had added that in because we know that obviously the BLM and the Forest Service do have their own separate trail standards, and to some degree the Weaver Basin Trail System sort of has standards in the master plan, but not much. So I think in the guidelines we talk a little bit more about potentially like advocating for creating Weaver Basin Trail System standards, or maybe some kind of unifying community forest trail standard. So we had kind of put that in just as to say what we're maintaining toward. But I think if this just creates vagueness, we can eliminate it.
I was just raising it. If no one else has any problems with it, then just leave it. And then on the second blue bullet, I kind of think the term limited has changed from the document on the right. Build limited new trails. If that's clear to everybody, then it can stay, but I wasn't sure exactly what. It seems to me on the right that the limited was in the sense of the number of new trails, whereas that's less clear on the left.
Before we get into that, I'm just gonna bring up something that Oz is bringing up to me as well. Could I ask it who BP and Stacy Silverbank are, to see whether or not you all are Zoom bombers as well?
Answer that with a meme.
Okay, so I think that's a yes from BP. Just gonna go ahead and kick you out. And Stacy left. Cool. Okay, so back to Alan's point. I don't think that was intentional.
No, I'm not saying it was.
Well, yeah, but if it appears that way, we can do some wordsmithing there as well.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, we have gotten a little sidetracked, so I'm going to try to move a little faster. I'll look into that ABA issue, at least with Forest Service, and move down to the appendix. Okay. Okay, so first of all, we had someone suggest that we take out relisting the purposes here. You know, obviously this wouldn't be new information. It's kind of just for clarity to present them again, since now we're in a different part of the document. Does anyone else have objections to that or feelings one way or the other? Okay.
I feel like it's redundant because they get referred to below that.
That's true.
If you have the same text in two places, then you've got to maintain it in two places. That's all.
That's true too.
That's also true. Yeah. Do you think, just for experimentation's sake, without this here, is it then clear what these are, along with, of course, the description of how they're laid out? I'm getting a couple head nods.
I think
I think it works well. It's particularly since not all the purposes will apply to all the guidelines. So
yeah,
right,
tied to it.
Agreed.
Okay, so it seems like not relisting the purposes is agreed on. Any objections?
Does the appendix title need to change to match community?
Yes, it will.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll have to do quite a bit of vocabulary changes for following our fruitful discussions today. Okay, one of the other kind of more logistical things, we had a suggestion. So previously we had listed out, you can see here, we have general guidelines, activity guidelines, and then kind of we listed activity guidelines to clarify that the following were activity guidelines. But it was suggested that we kind of adjust the formatting so that rather than stating again activity guidelines, we just make the activity guidelines themselves the headings. So you can see where I've adjusted that here. But it was also brought up that this might make what the activities are less clear when referenced in other places, just as activities in other parts of the document. I feel like I'm using a lot of terms and this might not be clear, but are there any objections necessarily to this new format, or is it more clear with the older one? Ambivalent?
I think it's fine.
Yeah, hard to tell. Whichever way you think is best, I'm sure will work out.
All right.
I think it's fine. I think at most it would, I mean, where it says general guidelines above, and then you could say, activity guidelines for each one of those in that, if necessary, but I don't, I don't know that it's totally necessary either.
Okay. I think then just something to keep in mind if a clear way presents itself as we're, going through and editing the entire document. We can figure that out.
I think it's worded this way, the way you have it now.
Okay. Okay, you will see within these 4A1s bullets, I added just one. I guess I should make that in blue. Just about communicating like seasonal restrictions on campfires and things like that. Maybe that'll just be probably putting up notices, say at the campground or wherever applicable. Just because I realized that was kind of lacking. But it was also suggested we swap the order, which I didn't have an issue with. So now what was for A12 is first, and what was for A11 is third. Are there any objections to those edits?
Is it the responsibility of the community forest to communicate seasonal restrictions? I feel like the Forest Service and BLM would have that covered.
Well, I mean, the Forest Service and BLM are part of the community forest, so.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
I think just saying it here makes it clear that we'll do those things on, WCF signage and where it's useful as well.
Yeah, I guess that Ricky's question might also kind of have been puzzling about the first one a little bit, because we do communicate with the NORALMUC about that sort of stuff, and so I guess, are these guidelines things that we're just trying to reiterate as, like, I guess what's the purpose of these guidelines is my question.
They provide more detail to the basically the purpose and desired outcomes that are listed in the actual plan. When we were originally, just for your information, Laura, like when we were originally putting this all together, a lot of this stuff was built into the plan, and so the thought was that was too much information, in a guiding document that should be a little more generalized. And so a lot of the more detailed kind of specific ideas and concepts that we wanted to include, but not necessarily in the body of the plan, would be in the appendices.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. These are just ways to achieve those desired outcomes, even if it's already
Correct.
That we do as a matter of policy. We're just reiterating it from the Community Forest Steering Committee standpoint. These are ways to achieve those desired outcomes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I mean, I will add too, we've been trying to reduce redundancy throughout. You know, like we don't want to just repeat the entire RMP, for example. So if ever, you know, Laura putting new eyes on it, if you see something that's like, well, this is something that is step one of every single thing we do, then it's probably not useful to list it here. But just wanted to see that in general.
Okay.
And sometimes I think some of the issues, it's helpful if you point out, if people from agencies or from anywhere, I guess, point out like that some of the guidelines, because remember, these are recommendations for all three responsible agencies, RCD, Forest Service, BLM. But sometimes they really should be directed at just one or two of those and not at all three. And we are trying to call that out clearly to, again, make sure we know who's responsible for things. So for example, like if something's irrelevant for BLM because you already do it or because you never are going to do it or something, then we've been trying to put at the beginning, like USFS and RCD do this, you know, or, and maybe this is only relevant for RCD because we like haven't done this so much in the past and it's not like a legal requirement that we have, but it is something we're trying to build up. So if you see things like that and you're like, oh, that seems like that only applies to RCD or only to Forest Service or whatever, that's helpful. We want to put that in so that these don't become muddled up of like, they're generally directed at everyone, but some of them don't apply to everyone. You know, we want to be clear about who they're directed to.
Yeah. Thanks for providing more info, Oz. Let's see. And I think kind of similarly, just on an organization level, it was suggested that some of these 4A2s get moved around to better pair like with like. And I had some ideas about that, but I didn't want to go crazy moving everything around. So I think in general, are there objections to potentially changing this order just to put, you know, like things next to each other? Not seeing anything, so moving on. Okay, let's see, something in the chat. I did get a comment or two specifically about this guideline, so I wanted to ask about content here. I think our intent was just to put forth that we want forest products considered, you know, where they may be impacted by forest management projects. So like thinking about if we're in an area with bare grass, how we could maybe enhance that, you know, habitat or that forest product, or protect even as part of whatever forest management we're doing. But if that is still confusing or not clear, I'd love to hear suggestions or what is confusing. All right, I'm not hearing.
I'm fine with it.
Okay, so I think I will leave that as is unless anybody else has something to say. Okay, and then I think this is the only really bullet I have under forest product collection as far as hunting goes, which in my opinion, hunting does seem like a forest product collection. You know, thinking about wildlife as part of the forest. And we really didn't get too much information throughout our investigation this last month on hunting and target shooting. I think it's just not a huge, you know, compared to how the community is so invested in like hiking and biking and et cetera, it's not as much of a use, I think. So I just wanted to kind of open it up to see if people have other thoughts on hunting or target shooting, basically firearm use.
Hi, Kathleen. It's Amelia. I agree that there's not a high use of the Weaverville Community Forest for hunting or target shooting. From my experience, most people usually take it a little further away from town.
Yeah, that's kind of been my impression. So I think what we have in here as the bare minimum is basically in the general guidelines, you know, just post signage or advocate for firearm safety in general. And here where we thought it applied to hunting as a forest product collection, potentially just putting up signage on the fire protection boundaries where, you know, which past hunting is allowed. So just making it clear where, if you do want to hunt on the community forest, where you can do that.
The only consideration there is, you know, I do think that's probably still the best option, but just want to raise that if you do post something that says like hunting allowed beyond this sign, you'll probably get more hunting beyond this sign than might occur otherwise, because people, oh, this is huntable land, when before they maybe, I don't know, just from Amelia's description of how most people really aren't doing it anyways. I guess this is a question in my mind of like, are we solving an issue that doesn't exist, or are we truly communicating something that the fire protection district really wants us to communicate?
No, it's a good point. I hadn't really thought of it in that way.
I would agree with that, because I wouldn't have assumed that people could hunt in the community forest. I don't know that a lot of people know that they can.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know that it's a little bit of a separate issue, I guess, but I know there has been some issue with illegal poaching kind of more within town in the urban area. So I guess then my follow-up question would be, is that creating an issue to post the boundaries and maybe welcome more people in, or does it not matter since they can do that anyway? Are we maybe worried about over hunting or anything like that? Or if it is just a non-issue, do we even feel that, you know, compelled or that it's necessary to put up that kind of signage just for communication's sake?
I don't know that we have anybody on the call from CDFW to speak to hunting regulations or over harvest or any of that at the moment.
You're right, we don't. And I had Alan actually put me in contact with our I can't think of the word, game warden. And I kind of just asked him, you know, told him the situation and showed him the community forest boundaries, and was like, if there's anything you do want to talk about, you know, any issues you are aware of in this area, let me know. And I haven't heard back anything from him, so I think we can assume. I mean, I'll try to get in contact with him.
I guess my question would be, with all, sorry, I guess my question would be, is just with all the trails and everything, is there actually any viable land that you would want to hunt on because of the active trail system, and so a lot of people moving through that area anyway is a safety concern?
Right.
Yeah, I know our hunting restrictions, like we don't have any except for the CDFW guidelines about how close you can be to places of residence, which is an issue with our neighbors on the BLM side. A lot of that area is not open to hunting just because it's so close to where people live. So I just don't want to cause more confusion if we put up a ring of signs around the fire protection district, but then the more pressing issue is probably the people who live on the outskirts of town. So I think it bears looking into more. And, you know, I assume this kind of stemmed from not necessarily a hunting concern, but from a fire concern. You know, they don't want hunting in the fire protection district because it could start fires.
Yeah, I think at least as far as the inclusion in the plan, I just didn't know whether hunting was allowed on the community forest or not, and wanted to be able to say that. So kind of just did that little bit of digging, and so I thought it could be useful to post that kind of signage. But yeah, we definitely don't want to create issues if there aren't already any. So I guess.
Yeah, generally people that are hunters, they pretty much know where they can or can't be.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so I think
we typically wouldn't post no hunting signs. You would see because BLM only has control over shooting, like if it's open or closed to shooting, or what type of shooting, like what type of rifle it's open or closed to. You would see us, you know, if we had a kiosk, we might post no shooting, but we don't typically post no hunting. I don't know if that makes sense, but because we have no say over it.
Okay.
And those signs typically get shot all up anyways.
So I'm kind of getting the impression then that maybe this should not be included. Could create more issues than not. Any objections? Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead.
I think we should pull it.
Take it out.
On a related note, though, on maps, do we want to make sure we include the fire protects the boundary, the border?
I think that could still be.
That would be an easy enough thing to do.
Yeah. I think just
because that would be that would, you know, like when you're out there, you know, it's you don't necessarily know where those things are, and if you are privy to maps, then that might actually be more informative to somebody that would actually follow that guideline.
Yeah. I think just to bounce back really quickly, does a similar sentiment apply to say just posting safety signage, such as near trails or that kind of thing on shooting? Would we not want to include this either?
I guess I just default to like what Kelly was saying. People who are hunters know generally about that stuff, and it's maybe more complex than a kiosk sign could handle. But
yeah,
I'm open if other people have different opinions on that, but it just seems like if we haven't been having that issue, then let's not make it more complicated for people.
Well, I think at least with this one, Alan had brought up to me that there is some amount of target shooting near Musser Hill Road and etc. But I wasn't really sure how to include this as a safety item.
Yeah, I just as a trail user, I'm not sure how popular that section of trail is. I like it, but if I ever hear gunshots, I don't go down that trail. So, because I know there's that target shooting area people use, and I've never formally tried to figure out. I know the trail is downrange from where they're shooting targets. I don't know on the elevation how much above it is. So that's just my concern.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure as far as writing it in, really the best way to ensure safety, I suppose, with a guideline or policy.
Are we aware of whether or not the guidelines allow shooting in specific areas within the community forest, though? Really?
So my impression has just been that shooting and firearms are allowed outside of the fire protection district boundaries, which are here. So like the area in question on Musser Hill Road, approximately here, they would be allowed to shoot there. So pretty much, yeah, it's not very much of the community forest where you are not allowed. But yeah, so this is kind of why why this issue has been on the table.
I think it's all right for it to say consider posting advisory signage. I mean, that's not like we will do such and such, but I also think that over the years that I've been in this basin, those locations have moved around a fair bit.
Okay.
So, you know, posting signage in one place doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change or educate anybody, you know, that might be shooting in another area.
Right. Okay.
Are there other outreach methods different than signage that might work better?
I would think that even maybe a simple statement on any kind of, you know, mapping or you know, something, you know, like if people are actually looking at the community forest or the Weaver Basin Trail System, you know, that it might be a way to educate people to say that, you know, and it could work both ways. I mean, it could be that be aware that these areas outside of this boundary, you know, could be utilized for, you know, target shooting, blah blah blah, and or you know, be aware that there are people on the trail system that you know that the trail system's inhabited, and that there's that it's not necessarily the safest thing to be in, you know, within the basin trail system itself while doing the target practice. So you know, I'm not certain which, it could be either or both or neither. Just you know, just seems like that would be a way to get more information out there, is on maps, so that people have, you know, like as it was suggested, we could put that, you know, put a light boundary or something like that that basically shows that, and maybe just say, you know, no shooting, you know, within this boundary or something to that effect.
Yeah, Kelly, I agree. I think a lot of these questions will be resolved from just some use maps with trail use and other allowable forest uses.
Yeah.
Right.
I do want to keep pushing us forward because we're already past 2. So I'm going to bump down a little bit. Okay. Again, this is something that kind of I have gathered in talking to, you know, involved persons and parties, but just wanted to bring it up with the group as far as kind of prioritizing maintenance of the trail system we have over developing new trails, and then when new trails are considered, prioritizing decom roads rather than virgin trails. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up and see if there were any objections to that sort of language.
The thing that this brings up for me was the fact that, you know, the new trails that are either in construction now or part of the NEPA that was being done, particularly on the Forest Service side, you know, as far as like the Weaver Basin Fuels and Recreation plan that the Forest Service has been working on, you know, neither of them, they're not, none of the actual planned new trails are on decommed roads. And normally, like when we're doing decommissioned roads, we're trying to get, you know, usage off of them almost entirely. So I'm not certain that this, usually the decommed roads are just sort of left, you know, they're not usually pulled or recontoured, especially in the basin here. So, you know, if they were already being utilized as trails, you know, whether like official system trails or non-system trails, they're probably likely to be, they're probably likely to continue to be used as such. So the ones that, you know, and the ones that I think, you know, I think that, I guess part of it too is that, and maybe Alan can speak to this a little bit more, the ones that, you know, that were considered for that particular NEPA and would like, you know, that you know, those were fairly well vetted with, you know, a lot of trail folks involved, you know, as being like high priority trails that were wanted, and none of them fall on decommissioned roads.
Well, and I think just to throw something in, I think as far as the Fields and Rec project goes, like that's obviously already underway. I don't think we're proposing to put on the brakes and find new routes or anything like that. And it's also to say, you know, we don't want to say only use decom roads. It was just kind of, we were thinking about using what we already have, what's already disturbed. I think we could maybe even add something to the tune of, I don't know exactly what to call them, but unofficial trails that locals do use, but haven't been graded and things like that, kind of rogue trails. Kind of use that system, but
Kathleen, I would propose that we restructure it. I would propose that we restructure this bullet for when commissioning roads, evaluate the option to utilize those roads as trails or designate them as trails, rather than prioritizing new trails on decommissioning roads, that when we happen to decommission roads, that we evaluate them for trail use.
I see, yeah. I think that makes sense to me.
There are also like already decommissioned roads that are obviously used as trails, but that are not official trails. So they're not, I think in some cases it's sort of a conservation issue because they're not being maintained or kept up to any sort of standard. They're already decommissioned. So that would be my only concern with that rewording.
We might be able to put something in that kind of covers both.
So Alan would know this, but there's a term for I mean, is it something like user maintained or user created trails? Isn't that the term?
That's how they refer to
in the system.
Yeah, user created.
User created non-system trails typically is how at least the Forest Service sort of thinks of them.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so it sounds like just rewording for C23 a little bit, potentially to include user created trails and more so in the designing of road decommissioning or road commissioning.
Yeah, I would be in support of that.
Okay. All right, note made. Let's see what's going on in the chat.
Where it says establish an inventory of trails, I mean, we essentially did that on the entire Weaver Basin Trail system prior to the Wembo mountain bike race back in 2015. So I'm not sure, I don't know that we necessarily need to establish one, but maybe maintain or update.
Okay. Can you direct my eyes there, Kelly? I'm not seeing it.
It's like out under 4C22, and it's like the third one of the little.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay, so I'm just gonna adjust that too.
Do you want, since you're changing that,
yeah.
do you want to change it to inventory of system and non-system trails?
if that sounds feasible, I think that's probably
Yeah,
useful
we
information
we
to have.
did that as well. I mean,
Right.
we had all the non-system trails at the time also inventoried. So I mean, you know, I don't know that we need to. Yeah, I mean that'd be good to have both.
Okay. And Kelly, has that kind of traditionally been an RCD effort? Should we specify TCRCD?
We have done most of that, yeah, most if not all of it. So, you know, if Alan wants to kick down a, you know, a Strava of some of the new segments as they're going in or whatever, you know, like we could certainly include all that. Since it's
Yeah, I'm
likely
happy.
default.
Once the trails are end to end implemented, then yeah, I'm happy to provide that. CC, I'll be on it.
Okay.
Yeah, that works. Thanks.
We are getting close to the end of our meeting, so I'll try to kind of transition into next meeting discussion. So our next and I think last Community Forest Strategic Plan meeting is April 2nd. We'll be discussing kind of retroactively collaborative decision making, which we at some point in the middle of the process decided would be objective 1. So we haven't discussed that yet. And I think we'll also be able to fit into that meeting discussing funding for the community forest, which will also be in the strategic plan, and potentially kind of doing some of this prioritization discussion we've been talking about. So I'm sure you'll all individually hear from me once again on this type of topic in the coming weeks. And if you know you would like to speak to me and or Azalee specifically, you already know, you have questions or comments in mind, please feel free to reach out before I get to you. And so I think, well, first I'll just ask, are there any thoughts or suggestions kind of for the April agenda logistically?
Will we be finishing the last section of this chapter?
Of recreation or?
Yeah, at the next meeting.
The
well,
guidelines for management. Is that one? Was that what you're talking about, Ricky?
I think it's like campsites or something. Camp management, yeah.
Or D.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we kind of ran out of time in this meeting talking about some other things, but I think a little bit of the discussion that we've already had on camping may influence this. But if we find time in the next agenda, we could definitely come back to this, because I think there are probably things unsaid about camping on the community forest. But otherwise, I mean, I think it sounds like we need to do a little bit of recon anyway on this topic. So it's definitely not finalized. Okay, anything else for April agenda thoughts?
I would say probably don't expect that we'll revisit recreation or any in the next meeting. Typically we have to stick to just the topic of that meeting. So things that aren't covered, if you still have strong feelings about it, you know, you can always monitor the Google document for the most up-to-date version, and you can always call and email Kathleen and I, and we can resolve the comments as best we can. And yeah, like Kathleen says, we pretty much, from what I heard, sounds like we decided to move this whole new campground or campground enhancement issue to like the evaluate level of commitment. So that's the general direction. But yeah, if anybody has strong feelings, I would say get in touch with us one-on-one, because I don't think we will have time as a group to discuss it in the next meeting, would be my intuition.
A real quick question about this, and this is geared towards Pat. Just based on our discussions in the recreation committee for the Trinity County Collaborative Group. Is this delegate management of the Weaverville delegate management basically of the the East Weaver Group campground to the WCSD? Is that something that they even want to do?
I don't know that they do anymore. I mean, it's been a while since the discussion, there's been a discussion with the CSD about it, and what, their interest was that they want their water tanks are on the East Weaver campground, and they wanted to essentially trade that land for other lands, I believe, and take over the campground. But their board decided that they're a water delivery special district, and that managing campgrounds was something that they didn't think was in their bailiwick. At least that's what it was 2 or 3 years ago. They have a new general manager. They have new board members. I haven't heard anything recently about it. But they were going to have, hosts at the campground, all that kind of thing. But I don't know. I don't know whether it's worth still having on the agenda or in the strategic plan or not. How that campground gets used is still, I think, a big issue for the Forest Service, and whether or not it remains within the contract with the concessionaire is still up in the air also.
Right. I would almost recommend at this point that we take that line out altogether. And I'm going to I have another meeting with Tim Casper on Tuesday anyway, so I can ask him like point blank about whether there's, whether this is a non-starter. But that was my impression of the discussion that had happened then also. So I think, to me, evaluate a new concessionaire as the current permit expires probably covers that.
Okay.
Right. I think
okay. Yeah.
Enough.
I had kind of gotten the impression that the CSD was still potentially a player, which was why that got in there. But yeah, if you could ask, that would be awesome.
Probably, I'll confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that they're taking it off the table.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I know we only have 5 minutes here, and there's obviously still things we would all love to discuss. So I think just shortly, I was hoping to have more discussion time, but wanted to bring up through the comments, and I think throughout this process, people have talked about prioritization and how the guidelines are ordered and that kind of thing. And again, like right now, there is no priority just in the way that the guidelines are ordered. And, we're kind of making a statement about that at the beginning of each appendix so that hopefully it's not confusing. So, WD21 is not more important than WD23. But, we have started thinking about maybe that is something that we want to do. We have been planning on, to come up in the next meeting, even prioritization of different activities. So for example, within forest management, are we thinking it's more of a priority for the steering committee to do a harvest or controlled burns or et cetera, et cetera. But we were not considering prioritizing guidelines for activities and getting into that specific level of detail. But maybe, if we want to say like, this is the #1 guideline, or these are the top 3, or say we want to have this guideline done by approximately 2025, or rank them, whatever. I think if that is a way that people think will be more effective, that's something that can be considered as we finish up the document and work on that prioritization. Osley, was there anything else you wanted to add kind of as an intro to that topic?
So I have a question. So Osley put a note up just on a minute ago on the chat about the draft going before the public in late April. And I just had a question of whether or not you intend to share the draft with the full steering committee before that.
I guess I don't have a necessarily thought out answer for you, Pat, but I think we were kind of thinking that because the steering committee has been so involved with the drafting of the document itself, and you guys see, each section and iteration, I don't think we were necessarily planning a specific steering committee comment period and then public comment period, just to, in the interest of time, if this steering committee could also just comment during public comment and throughout the process, but maybe if that is something you would strongly suggest, we can think about that and ask what other people think.
Kathleen, I would strongly suggest that the steering committee has the option to review the complete draft, since there's been so many structural changes over time.
Yep.
Before it goes to the public.
I agree. Yeah, we should have the ability to look at sort of what we consider, a fairly finalized draft prior, to it getting into going to public comment.
Yeah, and I think, Kathleen, I think that April 16th would be a good, we already had that as a pre-deadline, so we can just share that with the steering committee on April 16th. And then there's a week before April 23rd.
Yep.
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I have got 2:30 on the dot. I know some people have already had to jump off, but I can hang out for a minute if there's anything else, any other burning questions or comments people had. But, like Azalee said, you know how to reach me, you know how to reach us. So please do reach out if there are things you still want to communicate. And we obviously have revisions to do. So we'll be sending out next week, as we have been, kind of what's happened post meeting to go along with our discussion.
And yeah, and just
I
know.
Go ahead.
Just at the very end, Kathleen just brought up this question about prioritizing the different points, and I think that's one of the most important comments that we've gotten. And Laura, I know you left a thoughtful comment about that, so I think it's one of the most important things to consider to make the plan useful. So Laura, if you specifically want to talk more about ideas for that, or if other people have ideas about how they feel like the guidelines should be prioritized or not, then I think that's a really important point, and we'll talk about it during the prioritization stuff next month. But anyone who's willing to talk one-on-one about that, I think it's super important. So I'm sad we didn't have time today.
I think there's going to need to be a discussion about the 4D23, the campgrounds as they relate to houseless and transient populations. That will draw a lot of eyes to it.
Yeah, that's definitely a conversation I wanted to have, but I think it is pretty much sounding like an additional campground is probably not part of at least this strategic plan update, so it may turn into a non-issue.
Laura, do you have for that 4D22, do you I mean, it basically sort of, I think, addresses what we had talked about earlier, just as consider establishing, but at this point, I mean, between you and Jennifer, do you think that should just be pulled?
I mean, I think we would have a very very steep uphill battle with the neighbors we have in the community forest. I don't know if they would want to see, or no, I know they wouldn't want to see a campground, especially an unpaid campground there. I mean, we've had just the most issues at like Steiner Flat Campground in Douglas City. And, I think Ricky made a comment too that, we don't seem to be able to manage the one campground we do have in the community forest. So, I mean, I know that's on the Forest Service side and you guys are looking at the BLM side, but I guess we need more evaluation of it. Like, where exactly, are there any ideas for where? Are there neighbors there? But, we have relatively accessible campgrounds in Junction City and Douglas City, and we have our hands full managing those.
Yeah. Well, and I want to throw out too, like, I don't want anyone to think I'm hell bent on creating a new campground. I think I, have kind of just gotten the feeling that, like Alan was saying, I think that the community does want some kind of solution to being able to have local community camping. So I, just thought of that as an option. I don't think necessarily that an additional campground is the only option or the number one option, just put that in there as consider. But if it's absolutely not an option, like we've been saying, we might just want to take it out entirely.
Well, the issue of adding a campground from the steering committee side of things goes back to essentially the discussion with the Weaverville Community Service District and East Weaver Campground, and the equestrians request that there be a campground that would be easier for horsey people to bring trailers into, which East Weaver is configured to be able to do that. So an additional campground, the idea there was actually a campground off of Musser Hill Road that there's already a big flat that they use informally when they have events that would be developed into a campground that would be a little bit easier to use.
And then previously, the Forest Service, Sally Cousins had discussed adding in the Rush Creek campground area because there's other areas of Rush Creek Basin that are in the community forest, and adding that, which could also be looked at tying into a trail from there into the Weaver Basin trail system. But there was the discussion of whether to include that area, which is not currently in the Weaverville Community Forest, into it or not, because it's not in the Weaver Basin, and what do we want to define as the Weaverville Community Forest boundary.
Right. That's useful. I know Ozzy and I a few weeks ago were trying to figure that out.
Under 4D23, is that what the second sort of little bullet in there where it says an accessible backcountry campground, is that what that's attempting to address?
I think that was part of it. But I think my main motivation kind of in drafting 4D23 was trying to come up with creative solutions for the camping issues that we do experience in the area, and houseless populations. But yeah, I don't see why all of these things also couldn't be applied to a potential equestrian campground.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about that is obviously like like Laura and Jennifer were talking about earlier, like the issue of homelessness and transient populations camping out on public lands, that was almost exclusively and has continued to be almost exclusively a BLM problem just because of its proximity to town. Where almost all the Forest Service ground is, like not that close to, like services, like stores and things of that nature that can be walked to easily. And so I know that there were some issues on the East Weaver campground with regard to, homelessness in there, but that's almost the limit of it on the U.S. Forest Service side that I'm aware of. And so, you know, that was something early on that, you know, we identified was, you know, like all the people that were, like I was saying earlier, like were camping out in that whole stretch, like between, say, Mill Street and, you know, Munger Gulch, you know, up past Oregon Street. That was something that people wanted to put an end to. And, you know, by and large, that has essentially stopped to a certain extent. I mean, there's a little bit of it, but I mean, like not the long term, like people with vehicles coming in, camping out for like 3 or 4 months at a time, like they were on the BLM property before. So
that's what Steiner Flat is for.
Oh,
I would
Just
say
kidding.
that it still happens on the community forest at the dispersed sites, but they're just not as visible. And so that it still is plaguing the Forest Service, but we don't see it unless you go to some of these more remote dispersed camping sites. There's still depositions of cars, leaving their trailers, camping for long periods of time, all of that. But for the Weaverville Community Forest, my understanding was that some of that played into why East Weaver is being managed the way that it is, from concerns of the neighborhood, and that there would be some concerns specifically surrounding campfires, which Laura already alluded to, especially in the Timber Ridge and Mill Street area, if there was going to be any evaluation for campgrounds in that area. My proposal would be on that topic that start with a community meeting that surrounds the topic of campgrounds and find out, does the community support it or does the community not? Because I think it's mixed. And I think there are few landowners on this call, and so it's hard to make the decisions for what the steering committee should be promoting or not promoting when we haven't had that big conversation with the community.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, even just evidence from this call, we could probably have a whole community meeting dedicated specifically to camping and OHV. But figuring that out at this moment is.
I suspect that, you know, Alan's, you know, desire to, you know, like he expressed earlier, has something to do with the fact that, you know, they want to be able to put people up, you know, for, you know, bike races and things of that nature, you know, like, and have places for people to go to do that, you know, and to a certain extent, they, you know, they do some of that in the park, but, you know, if there were developed campsites, people would use them, I think, for that purpose or those purposes. But you know, these other issues are pretty daunting, just from my understanding of them, to actually make, you know, to at the scale that they probably would like to see that happen, it would be unlikely, just given that we are having such difficulty just with the East Weaver campground itself, and the fact that we can't really even put people up there. So
I guess maybe for this document, my suggestion would be to remove that second bullet under 4D23. Like, no need to get that specific about it. You know, the overarching thing is we should be considering how campgrounds and some minimal infrastructure can alleviate houseless and transient populations issues. And if a campground is part of that, then it is. But if it's not either, I don't know. It would be a flashpoint in a public comment period for something I feel like the steering committee were pretty like, oh, about. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you have comments specifically on a campground, Laura, again, that was a little bit of my brainstorm and pulling from other resources, that it's like, well, you know, kind of similar to the OHV issue, maybe if we don't want illegal OHV use, we just give them a place. And so my brainstorm was like, if we don't want illegal camping or long-term dispersed camping, maybe providing a campground helps to alleviate some of that. But you know, it sounded like you did have thoughts or experience on that as well. So if the answer is like, nope, it makes it worse, then we don't want that in there.
I guess I don't know is really the answer, but
yeah,
we
it's a complex issue.
It doesn't, like, a backcountry campsite doesn't alleviate those issues, right? Like people want to be close to town. That's why they're using the community forest, the BLM side, because they can walk into town. So I think the backcountry thing just, it puts it like out of sight, out of mind. So maybe it would solve some issues, but create huge other ones.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely tough.
And again, that management question is just like, we're already at capacity managing the campgrounds we have.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's also very useful feedback, is like, even if we started construction on a new campground tomorrow, if it just makes it even harder to manage the entire network, then yeah, that's maybe an anti-solution. You know, just like with limiting new trail creation. So all is good to keep in mind.
I think bathrooms is a good thing to consider, though. That, you know, yeah, because that's a major water quality issue.
Yeah. Good to hear. All right. Well, we are at 2:45, and like I said, I can talk about this all day. So if people want to stay on the call, feel free, but I also don't want anybody to feel like they have to be here.
I have to go. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for being here, Laura. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Cindy.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks.